Is the Vikings quarterback competition already over? Plus, what players are standing out in the first week of training camp? That's coming your way on the Vibe of the Vikings. Welcome to the Vibe of the Vikings, where we catch the real feel for Minnesota Vikings football. I'm your host, Josh Kolojeski, and we have got a jam-packed show today. The first week of training camp is in the books, and there is plenty to talk about, from the quarterback competition to some rookies making a name for themselves already. We'll break it all down. Plus, we'll get into what one wide receiver contract extension signed this week means for Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson's future with your Minnesota Vikings, before hanging it up and calling it a day. Thanks for joining us. We are a part of the Grey Duck Sports Network here on the Vibe of the Vikings. You can follow us on Twitter at Grey Duck Sports. We are also at Grey Duck Sports on YouTube and at grey.duck.sports over on TikTok. There you can find the recordings of all of our podcasts on the Grey Duck Sports Network, not only the Vibe of the Vikings, but the Twinkie Town Tavern and the Grey Duck NFL Show, as well as different series we are working on of shorts about Minnesota sports history, Viking stuff, Twin stuff. Just a lot of stuff to look forward to. Go and like and subscribe in all of those areas. Again, on TikTok, we are at grey.duck.sports, and on Twitter and YouTube at greyducksports. Well, the quarterback competition is going kind of about as most folks expected it, at least so far. And that is the major thing that we're looking for throughout Minnesota Vikings training camp, of course, this summer and into fall, is who is going to win the job for the start of the season. And most of the money is coming in on Kyler Murray, and that seems to be the case. You might remember JJ McCarthy last year didn't have a great first season, only played in 10 games, looked good during the final part of the season, but looked very bad during the first half. Had injuries that he dealt with throughout, so the Minnesota Vikings signed Kyler Murray to a league minimum deal because he's already being paid a ton of money by the Arizona Cardinals this year. And Kyler Murray comes in to compete with JJ McCarthy for that quarterback spot. And the competition really starts during training camp, and especially during the padded portion of Vikings training camp, which did get underway on Monday. They took a day off from the pads on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday, which is when we were recording it, right back into the pads. So we have a lot of different reports to sift through. We don't have a lot of video to look at. We'll talk a little bit about that more later in the show. But I am in Arizona, so I don't have the benefit of being able to go and make my own judgment decisions on how the quarterbacks are playing, how other players are looking for the Minnesota Vikings. But I can trust some of the reporters whose takes I kind of favor more towards some of the others. I will probably look at Tyler Fournette more than I will look at Kevin Seifert, or I will look at Will Ragatz and take his with more of a grain of salt than I do that of somebody like Matthew Kohler. Those are just my preferences in terms of which reporters I trust to actually be good analysts of football as well. So a lot of what I am getting is coming from those reports, and what I am getting from those reports is that Kyler Murray is winning this quarterback competition. And that is mostly by default at this point. He's had good throws. He's been inconsistent from what I've read. And in the plays that I've seen, he still has that leg kick. I'm not sure exactly how good his mechanics are. He still has problems vacating the pocket early, which is something you don't typically want to see, especially during training camp when you're not going to get hit in the pocket in the first place. But by and large, he has looked good. He's been processing things pretty well. He's been taking more shots, being more aggressive than JJ McCarthy. And for that reason, he is right now the front runner for the competition, and that's kind of where he was coming into the year. I gave it a 65-35 chance that Kyler Murray would be your starting quarterback, and then JJ McCarthy would indeed have to prove himself in order to pass Kyler Murray. But I was hoping for, in this quarterback competition, that it would be one by one of the quarterbacks being exemplary and doing some really good things, and I don't think that is the case so far. I think Kyler Murray, again, like I said, is winning this competition more by default rather than by putting forth these truly great feats of quarterback play in the first week of practice. But it's been decent. It's been good. Inconsistent, but good. JJ McCarthy also inconsistent, but is leaning more on the negative sides of that inconsistency. And from the reports that I've read, he is having trouble processing, is still missing some gimme throws. There was plenty of Twitter stuff on Kevin Seifert's tweet, who says that there was an audible murmur that went throughout the crowd when JJ McCarthy missed 3 wide open receivers. I'm not sure if it was all consecutively or in a row, but it was during a time when there was no defense on the field. Going into depth in the Tyler Forness article on A to Z Sports of his training camp notes from day 6, it seemed to be that one of those was a swing pass, and then the other 2 were corner shots to the end zone. Those 2 are a little bit more understandable, especially for a quarterback who is trying to work on layering the football a little bit more. The swing pass is definitely something that is a little bit concerning when you're throwing against players on air. So he's missed some throws. He's had some good throws here and there, but again, it has been wildly inconsistent. Part of that could be because he is reworking his mechanics once again and still getting used to the feel of all of that. From what I've seen on video, from the few videos that have gotten past the Vikings security and gotten onto social media, it looks like that leg kick is fixed and his stride is shorter, and he is able to get more quick power and quick release with the football, but a lot of the times he is late with his throws, depending on what reports you trust from training camp. But the layering is starting to improve and the footwork is starting to improve. But mainly the thing that most folks are concerned about is his trouble processing, his trouble reading the field. We saw that at times last year. In fact, I think during the time where JJ McCarthy had the most of his success during the last part of the season, the last 3 to 4 weeks of the year, he was having success because he was doing mostly one side of the field reads and wasn't always looking full field read like he was asked to do more during the first parts of the season. And when that became a little bit too much on McCarthy's plate, they decided to take a lot more off, simplify the offense, give him a half field to look at, and then just let him run if that was not there, because the processing was slow. And it looks like right now, the reports are that processing has not improved. One of the things that really, the mechanics and the processing were the 2 things that really needed to improve for JJ McCarthy. And as of right now, it seems like those are, one of those is taking a step forward, the mechanics, and one of those is still at the same place it was last year. And if that stays this way throughout training camp, well, then it's going to be Kyler Murray's job no matter what. You'd still like Kyler Murray to go out and take the job by the horns and not have as many of the inconsistencies, I think, if he is going to win, in order to have a little bit more confidence in the quarterback position for the 2026 season. But regardless, he might not even have to do that if JJ McCarthy has some trouble processing. Now, does this mean anything at this point? I am going to say probably not. I mean, yes, you never want to see your starting quarterback or your hopeful starting quarterback in JJ McCarthy, the guy that you took 10th overall just a couple of years ago, that is still one of the youngest quarterbacks in the league. You don't want to see a guy that had inaccuracy problems last year just miss a swing pass, especially when there's no defenders, or make some of the egregious misses that he has. If you can't complete those layups, you're going to have a hard time being a starting quarterback despite the other traits you might possess. And we know McCarthy has a lot of good traits. He's got a good ability to run the football. He's got a very strong arm, stronger than Kyler Murray's arm. But Anthony Richardson has all of those traits as well, and he couldn't hit the layups, and he lost his job to Daniel Jones in his 3rd year, and that looks like the case, what the case might be for JJ McCarthy. But I don't think we have to dig too deep into this quarterback competition just yet. You know the game Family Feud, the game show Family Feud, hosted by Steve Harvey, and he goes and he asks a group of family that there's a question that is asked, a survey that is asked to people on the streets. I don't know who gets the survey. I wish I would, be able to take a part in the survey. So Family Feud folks, if you need survey taker. I'm right here. And the goal is each member of the family gets a guess, and you are trying to guess the most common answers out of the 100 answers that are given. And you're going up against another family head to head. The thing is, in the first round, you might have completely dominated. You might have gotten 83 of the possible 100 points, and the other family got 17. And you have this huge gap to work with, and that's kind of what we have with Kyler Murray and JJ McCarthy. But the thing is, in round 2, in round 3 of Family Feud, those points become a lot more. So even though you have that 83 to 17 lead after the first round, the other team in round 2 could just outscore you 55 to 45 overall, but still might be able to tie the game because those points are worth double, and in the third round, those points are worth triple. And that's kind of how I'm looking at this Vikings quarterback competition. For the first few weeks of training camp, preseason, that is round 1. And right now, Kyler Murray is winning round 1. But if JJ McCarthy plays better, even marginally in round 2, and in round 3, I still think it will be his job, despite Kyler Murray outplaying him to such a huge gap in the first couple of weeks of this season, because the second part and third part of training camp for me is what is going to be a little bit more decisive. And I think it's what our coaches and offensive coordinators and assistants are all going to be looking at more often than not, because past those first 2 weeks of training camp, first 2 weeks of practices, you have two big things that happen. 3 preseason games, which we'll probably get to see both Kyler Murray and JJ McCarthy in at least 2 of those. If you don't see Kyler Murray, or I guess if you don't see JJ McCarthy in any of those games and it's not injury related, then you can probably make a guess that if one of those guys is not playing, that person has won the competition. But we're going to see just how they look in live game action. And then also during the joint practices. That's the third round. That is what has been the big decider for Kevin O'Connell, is those joint practices. And you're going to have a good litmus test in those joint practices this year because you're going up against the Baltimore Ravens. And by and large, most folks have agreed over the last half decade or so that you can gauge more from those unbroadcasted joint practice sessions. That is more akin to what a regular season game will look like than what an actual preseason game looks like. So you're going to get a lot from those 3 preseason games, and even more so in those joint practices against the Baltimore Ravens. So I think even with the wide gap that JJ McCarthy has to fill as of right now, I think if he outperforms in the preseason games and he outperforms at joint practices, then JJ McCarthy goes on and wins this job, despite him, in day 6 of training camp, missing a swing route and having an audible murmur go throughout the crowd. So there is still a lot to be done, even though we are a week into it, and it looks like the job is Kyler Murray's to lose at this point. Some caveats, though, about the quarterback competition. No matter how you feel about it at this point, whether you think maybe you've been there and you completely disagree with what other folks are saying in the reports and you think that JJ McCarthy has been better, or you think that Kyler Murray has indeed already won this competition through the first week, I'm just going to lay out some caveats that I think need to be taken into consideration before we really even come to a complete conclusion of who is winning in this first week of camp. And the first of that is that, especially for folks like me that don't get to go out to training camp and have to rely on video, which is more scarce this year, media members are notoriously bad football analyzers. Kevin Seifert, I love his stories. I love his ability to report news. I'm not going to take anything he says about what is going on the actual football field very seriously. Same for Matthew Coller. And same for even some of the guys that I've listed in the past. I don't think those guys are there to analyze the X's and O's of football. Maybe guys like Arif Hassan, yes. Luke Braun, yes. Tyler Forness, yes. Those guys are more into the content creating world and are more breaking down technique, breaking down scheme, breaking down how the quarterback is actually performing. A lot of these reporters are in the groupthink mindset, which is going to be more of the popular opinion. They're going to see what is happening just on the surface level and come to conclusions based on that without knowing the minutia. Whereas some of the folks that I would trust, and like the quarterback content creators, the former quarterbacks like JT O'Sullivan and Chase Daniel, obviously you're going to weigh a lot more heavily what those guys are saying than what Matthew Kohler and Kevin Seifert and Judd Zulgad and Phil Mackey are all saying, because those guys are reporters that don't know football in terms of as well as they need to in order to make any sort of decision about who is winning this competition. And that's no shade to them. It's just that's not their job, and that's not where they have been trained. I am having some scouting experience and having some self-taught sort of things. I trust my opinion more than I do about the media members, but I can't go and see and make those conclusions for you. So I'm trying to judge as much from some of the tape that is coming out of Vikings training camp. And I should say, though, with another caveat to this caveat that maybe the media members are notoriously bad football analyzers, especially just straight up reporters. There was an Athletic article that has some comments about random executives throughout the football. It's a Mike Sando article that he does every year, in which he ranks quarterbacks into tiers based on how other players, coaches, and front office people would vote to put those quarterbacks into tiers. And JJ McCarthy fell into tier 4. Some guys voted into tier 5. I believe he got one vote for tier 3. But the main comment, I didn't read the whole article, but the main comment that came up from Mike Sando's article was that JJ McCarthy looks like he's a guy that has never played football before, or like he's still learning how to play, that doesn't know what football is. So that is telling. And I think at times that was true last year. But it's also worth mentioning that those executives are not getting a look at what is happening in training camp. They are getting a look at what happened during the course of last season. So their analysis even is a bit dated at this point. And then Kyler Murray was in tier 3, and the thought there that was placed, the consensus thought is that folks are excited to see what he does in this Minnesota Vikings offense. Coaches around the league, player around the league, and front office folks around the league. So that does also give us some insight as to what coaches and executives are seeing from this quarterback battle, at least on the outside, in a more dated sort of sense. And another caveat is that we don't exactly know what Kyler Murray and JJ McCarthy are being asked to do. The progressions are slow, but maybe that's because JJ McCarthy is being taught to be intentional right now in his progressions. You are going to be able to do a lot more in the practice field than you are actually going to be able to do during a game. You are training yourself during this time, and it is okay to make mistakes. I mentioned that in minicamp, that Juwan Jennings catch, where JJ McCarthy threw it into triple coverage, layered it up, and kind of put Juwan Jennings in a dangerous sort of position if it was an actual game. If he makes that throw during a game, I think it's getting intercepted, and I would have problems with his decision. But as I said at that time, I think that with one of the main things he needs to be working on, layering the football, you're only going to get so many live reps in before the game starts, so you have to take advantage and be less risk averse and work on actually layering the football during those live reps. And so layering it in between 3 defenders in practice, where the consequences of throwing an interception are unimportant and insignificant, that is the perfect time to work on those throws. And so if you are trying to get JJ McCarthy to really understand what he is seeing with each progression, and it's not just going head, turn to each and every place without actually recognizing what's going on, if you're saying that it is okay for him to take a little bit more time with his progressions if he is being fully taught what to look at, then that is one reason why the progressions could be taking long. Another reason is he's just a slow processor. So we can't tell beyond the surface level, beyond what we're seeing, about all of this stuff that coaches are talking about. Kyler Murray vacating the pocket early, Could be because they are wanting him to show them just how good of a thrower on the run he is. So he could be vacating the pocket early because that's what he's being asked to do. JJ McCarthy, who has not been taking as many shots in practice, could be being asked to look first for the underneath outlets so that when it comes to a game time and he sees that the deep ball isn't there or something intermediately isn't there, that he knows exactly where the check down option is. It becomes more instinctual for him. Or for Kyler Murray, a guy that has been more risk adverse throwing down the field in his career, trying to get him out of his comfort zone. It's not just that one of them is now, this superhuman wants to throw down the field type of guy, but it could be they are asking him to emphasize that. And they are asking JJ McCarthy to emphasize the check down because he had such a long ADOT last year. Average depth of target was huge last year. So I do think that is another caveat with this entire quarterback competition, is that the surface level can only tell us so much because we do not know, even as JT O'Sullivan and Chase Daniel, the guys who are probably going to be the most qualified to break down the X's and O's and break down the mechanics and break down the true quarterback performances, even they are not going to know exactly what these guys are being told to emphasize on during training camp. That's why, again, I think the preseason, the dress rehearsal that is, and the dress rehearsal that the joint practices against the Ravens will be, are going to be a little bit more telling, because even when you're told to emphasize something maybe in a preseason game, you're still going to revert back to your game day sort of thinking process. So you'll see the more raw and real version of both of those quarterbacks during that time. And also, the final caveat is right now, if the quarterback competition ended today based solely on what we saw in camp and nothing else, if it was just a blind ranking and you didn't know who these players were from one another, the consensus has been that Carson Wentz has been the best and he would have won the competition, but he's not in the competition. And I think the chances of Carson Wentz starting a game and being quarterback one at any point during this season for the Minnesota Vikings are below 1%. Even if there is an injury, I think Anthony Richardson has a higher chance of starting the game for the Minnesota Vikings this year than Carson Wentz does. I think Jalen Milroe has a higher chance of starting a game for the Minnesota Vikings this year than Carson Wentz does. I think Will Levis has a higher chance of starting a game for the Minnesota Vikings than Carson Wentz does. Because if there is an injury to both JJ McCarthy and to Kyler Murray, I think you are bringing in and looking to bring in one of those young, promising arms that Kevin O'Connell has fallen in love with in the past with Will Levis and with Anthony Richardson, or that Nolan Teasley has fallen in love with in the past in Jalen Milroe, so much to the point that he helped draft him to Seattle, and Milroe, for what it's worth, having a good training camp. So I think that is the major takeaway, that right now, if the quarterback competition ended today, Carson Wentz would be the winner, and that is not going to be the result because there are quarterbacks that are not in this Vikings organization right now that have a higher chance of starting a game for the Vikings than Carson Wentz does in 2026. So let's all take a deep breath when we analyze this quarterback competition and know that it is far from over, and there is no reason to crown either player until we get a fuller look of more padded practices and a fuller look of what they're doing in preseason and those joint practices. All right, that is the quarterback competition. That is the A topic, and it's going to be the A topic every single week here on Vibe with the Vikings until the decision has come to a conclusion, and until the white smoke has appeared from TCO Performance Center. That is going to be our main focus. But let's just look at some other things that are going on around the Vikings training camp at this very moment. And I think one of the very interesting things that I have been curious about, and in fact, in last week's show even said I am wanting to see and hear about from training camp outside of the quarterback competition, is the revamped run game. And so far, from what we've heard, I like what's going on at TCO Performance Center. Frank Smith was brought in from the Miami Dolphins to be an assistant coach. He was the run game coordinator, or one of the run game coordinators in Mike McDaniel's offense with the Miami Dolphins over the last couple of years. The Miami Dolphins, for all of their faults during the Mike McDaniel era, fast offense was not one of them. Running the football was not one of their faults. And they had a ton of creative, different sorts of calls that emphasized not just one particular sort of running scheme, not just an inside zone, not just an outside zone, but melded a ton together, but made them all look so different, or at times the same. You might see the same look to start off a play with different motions, but it might be outside zone for one of those plays and a counter for the other, based on how the blocks start after the snap of the football. And what the Dolphins did last year was some late motions where they get a guy going very quickly, maybe just 3 or 4 steps to the side, and are snapping it right on once they get to their second or third step. So it's a short motion. The ball is snapped before they get set, and it puts them in a better blocking position, or it forces the linebackers to hesitate just a bit. And one of the key things you're looking to do as an offensive coordinator is to make defenses hesitate, because then you get an advantage to whatever angle it is you are trying to attack. You get a head start to that area with your offensive linemen. And a lot of that is what I hear has been happening with the Vikings run game in training camp, is they are trying to do a lot of what the Miami Dolphins did, and that is those short motions. They're going a lot more wide zone. They're practicing a lot more wide zone as well. Minnesota was a team that ran a lot of gap schemes last year, a lot of like ISO and duo sort of plays where it is just put a man on a man and have those guys assigned to their man before the play even starts. However, that was not Will Fries' biggest strength when he was with Indianapolis, or Ryan Kelly's for that matter, when they were both with Indianapolis. And Ryan Kelly's not here anymore, so that's beside the point, but Will Fries struggled last year. But when Will Fries was at his best with Indianapolis, it was in a wide zone offense where you can get a reach block to the outside, where you can get Will Fries in space, where it has more to do with beating your defender to an angle than just beating him off the line of scrimmage. And that is what Will Fries excelled at. That's why I was excited to bring him in, and I thought the Vikings were going to do more zone runs last year. I thought if they wanted to stick with the gap and man schemes, Tevin Jenkins would have been the better guard option to bring in for those sorts of purposes. But now it looks like they are going to match their scheme with the personnel that they went out to get last year, and I think that could mean a big year for Will Fries and a bigger year for Jordan Mason and Aaron Jones, and allow the Vikings to be more reliant on the run game, regardless of who their quarterback is. So let's hope that we can see some of those weird, funky motions throughout this training camp, and see how much that they are going to show once the preseason gets rolling. Here on August 15th is their first game. So just 10 days away from when we are currently recording this. Because, I mean, that is one of the things that I have been looking forward to the most, is that Frank Smith run IQ and what he brings in that manner. Let's look at some risers in your Minnesota Vikings training camps. I guess sometimes it's called Mr. Mankato. I think that's probably trademarked at this point, so I'm not going to call it Mr. Mankato because it was just a brilliant idea that Judd and Phil Mackey had when they were in their 1500 ESPN days, is let's name the player that is going to earn a roster spot based particularly on his play during training camp. Not all of those guys would fit into that bill anyway, which is another reason why I'm not going to call it Mr. Mankato, but I'm just going to go with the boring name of some of these risers during Vikings training camp, and what these names, and if they are able to actually take a step forward once the regular season hits, what that means for the Vikings 2026 campaign. And the first one I want to talk about is Ty Felton. Now, I was not a big Ty Felton fan when the Vikings drafted him in the 3rd round. In my big board for the 2025 NFL draft, I had him listed as a red player, which is made for depth only. He can be on special teams, but he's not going to be a decent wide receiver at this level, based on what I was able to see from him during his time at Maryland, and that was mostly how he was used during his rookie season. He was an excellent special teams player, especially on punts as a gunner. He was able to get down the field in a flash. but as a wide receiver, kind of fell into my expectations of him as a wide receiver. And I haven't seen a ton of film to confirm whether these reports are true, so again, take all of this with a grain of salt. But from what I've read, Ty Felton is beginning to take steps forward in his development as a wide receiver. And maybe that's to be expected with a guy like Keenan McCardle, who has been one of the best wide receiver coaches in the NFL over the last few years. Maybe we should have just always expected him to be able to mold a guy who is as athletic and fast and speedy as Ty Felton into an actual professional wide receiver. But from what I've seen, he made that really good acrobatic catch. And then Kevin O'Connell yesterday was talking about during his press conference how Ty Felton has made a lot of improvements at the top of his routes. And when you are making improvements at the top of your route, that means that you are dropping your hips better than you did last year. You are doing a head fake better if you have a cornerback stack than you are last year. A lot of folks, when they drop their hips and are not good wide receivers, will lean far too over and you want your eyes aligned with your toes when you drop your hips. If it's too far back, if your head is too far back and your eyes are behind your toes, you're going to lose balance and you're going to lose speed. If your eyes are far too over when you drop your hips, you are going to lose your balance and lose speed. You need your eyes and toes to be lined up. Eyes over toes when you drop your hips, or nose over toes is sometimes what it is called. You want that and as straight of a line as it can be. And when I watched Ty Felton at Maryland, and when I watched him last year, when he dropped his hips, that was an issue. He would lose balance, he would lose a step, and that gives the cornerback, even if he is caught off guard, or is a little bit slower to decelerate, it allows him to match up with you pretty easily. If it is true that at the top of his routes, he is doing a better job dropping his hips without telegraphing where he is going, then we're going to have a different conversation, I think, about Ty Felton in 2026. And I think it's also worth noting that Tyler Forness, in his training camp articles, has noted that Ty Felton could be a KJ Osborne candidate. If you don't remember KJ Osborne, shame on you, but I'll let you in on who KJ Osborne was. During his first season, I believe it was 2020, KJ Osborne was an absolutely terrible punt returner. He had like 6 or 7 muffs, it seemed like, throughout the course of that season. I remember wondering why KJ Osborne was on this team. And then he took a step forward and became an actual good receiver. So one, we didn't have to use him at all as a punt returner anymore. And two, it gave Minnesota an excellent option to pair with Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, Jordan Addison when Jordan Addison came. Although I don't know if those guys overlapped at all. But KJ Osborne made himself a great number 3 wide receiver who could get you 600 yards and 4 touchdowns as your third option on a year-to-year basis. And if Ty Felton is able to make those steps forward, then it puts the Minnesota Vikings in a pretty good position at wide receiver this year. Just think about it. You already have Justin Jefferson, the best, one of the best at least, in the game. You have Jordan Addison, a very good number 2 wide receiver that hasn't put up a 1,000-yard season, but is a big-time playmaker and has been close in 2 of his 3 seasons to reaching that 1,000-yard plateau. And then Juwan Jennings, who has been known as a solid X sort of threat, just can get off of physical coverage and catch contested balls even if he's not the best route runner. And that is good right now. But sometimes those guys are going to need to take some time off on the bench. And in those instances, well, what do? You bring in Ty Felton. Or next year, Juwan Jennings is only on a 1-year deal. Maybe you don't bring Juwan Jennings back because you trust that Ty Felton on a much cheaper deal is able to fully assume that number 3 wide receiver role. And this year, and this training camp, and whatever happens during this season is so big for the future of this team, because if Ty Felton shows during the limited spots that he gets to play in that he is a capable wide receiver more so than he did last year, then it gives the Vikings confidence to not have to pursue a number 3 wide receiver in free agency next year and not have to hope that a Juwan Jennings gets overlooked and falls into their laps like what happened this year. And maybe Jordan Addison becomes too expensive and the steps that Ty Felton has taken are actually that gargantuan. Then you feel comfortable even having Ty Felton as a number 2 wide receiver and freeing up some potential future contract money that is currently earmarked for Jordan Addison. We'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit later, but that is why it is so key to see what Ty Felton can do, and if he has truly improved his route running as the speedster that he is, then that is a wide receiver that could be dangerous and that Minnesota could be able to count on to be the number 3 wide receiver in 2027 and beyond. Another player that's getting a lot of hay is Charles Demings, the rookie cornerback. And I liked Charles Demings this year in the draft. He comes from a small school, and I think it's Stephen F. Austin. I could be wrong there. And typically I am very, very conservative at giving small school guys big grades, even when I like what I'm seeing for them. And typically, unless they are getting a lot of like Quinyon Mitchell sort of hype from Toledo, I'm not going to give them more than a yellow grade, which is it's a guy that could be a starter, could also be a high-end backup. And that's what I give Charles Demings. So he got pretty much the highest grade that I would consider giving a small school guy that does not have the draft hype based on his film, because I liked his athleticism. I liked his ability to play man-to-man coverage. So I liked when the Minnesota Vikings drafted him. And it seems like he is earning the trust of Brian Flores and company because he's playing a lot of first-team snaps. And now I think that we've had some times with James Pierre and Isaiah Rodgers both missing some time with minor injuries, and maybe that has been more of an opportunistic first-team rep workload for Charles Demings instead of an earned one. But that's still a couple of cornerbacks that he has to jump that were ahead of him going into training camp, like Zemiah Vaughn, like Dwight McLeathern, in order for him to earn those first-team reps, even with James Pierre and Isaiah Rodgers out. Now, I do want to be a little bit cautious because over the last 3 years, I think there has been a cornerback that has really impressed as the Mr. Mankato frontrunner in some instances. In 2024 or 2023, I think it was Mekhi Blackmon. He was fine, not great. In 2024, it was Dwight McLeathern. Again, we haven't seen a ton of him on the field. And in 2025, it was Zemiah Vaughn, who, with all that hype, didn't do too much. So I'm going to be cautious when it comes to crowning whoever it is that is looking good at cornerback, the rookie that is looking good at cornerback that was drafted low. I'm going to be hesitant to crown that person just yet as a steal in the draft because of what it has looked like with Blackmon, McLeathern, and Vaughn. But it is certainly promising for Charles Demings. That is where you want to be in your first week of training camp as a 5th or 6th round draft pick, and not the opposite. Jake Golday also proving himself to be a big part of this Vikings defense. He is getting a lot of first-team looks, and Minnesota and Brian Flores love versatile players. Jake Golday played off-ball linebacker at Cincinnati after having converted as an edge rusher, and when he was an off-ball linebacker at Cincinnati, he was best. His best trait was pass coverage, and he was best going backpedaling instead of being on the attack, and he was still good on the attack. So that is versatility in 3 different phases. A guy that used to be an edge rusher, so probably you'd think can rush the passer at least somewhat competently, that played off-ball linebacker, all right, you trust him to fit the run, that was at his best while he was in pass coverage. Okay, he can also do that. So you've got a guy that can do a lot of different things for you, and Brian Flores is already reaping the rewards of that. And Kevin O'Connell has spoken in glowing terms about Jake Golday. I liked Jake Golday. He had a light green grade for me. He was right about where C.J. Allen was on my draft board, and C.J. Allen was a consensus in some areas top one or top first round, not top one player, but top of the first or in the first round, late first round sort of player. So Jake Golday around that same sort of pedigree, and he is a second-round playmaker that is going to get snaps, I think, in a lot of different looks, a la Josh Metellus or a la what we could see from Jamal Adams. So Jake Golday is showing off his athleticism, showing off his versatility, and doing just about everything well at Vikings training camp right now. So that is some good news. Caleb Banks hasn't flashed, but he's been solid on the defensive line. He has played, which is the number one takeaway, is that he was ready to go for training camp from his dual foot injuries that he suffered one during the season in college football last year, and then another during the combine leading up to the NFL draft last year. It looks like he is full go, and we will continue to keep an eye on what he can do during camp. And then Dante Fleming, the second-year wide receiver from Tulane, who played with Chris Brazzell, who ended up going to it was Fleming and Chris Brazzell as the number two guys for Darian Mensah in that 2024 Tulane offense. Dante Fleming is also having a good camp at wide receiver. So if we're talking about depth wide receivers or guys that could one day take the mantle as your number three player, then Dante Fleming, I guess, is at least making a name for himself at this very moment. People have also liked Jacoby Thomas, Jacob Thomas. There's a lot of risers right now at Minnesota Vikings training camp. I can't give you like a full list of confidence. In confidence, I can't say that what is being reported is true and that all these guys are going to be superstars, but I think it is encouraging that these guys are the ones that are getting some of that buzz because they fill holes on our team that we needed to be filled. And moving on from Vikings training camp, we'll go apropos to that. Vikings training camp adjacent, if you will. It is Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens, a player that was picked just ahead of Jordan Addison in the 2023 NFL Draft, signed an extension on Tuesday that goes for 4 years and is worth $140 million. Now, if that sounds familiar, it is because that is about the same extension that Justin Jefferson signed ahead of the 2024 NFL season. It is the same average annual value as Justin Jefferson. Yes, Zay Flowers, who probably isn't even better than Jordan Addison, is going to make as much money as Justin Jefferson. And that is something that I think us as Vikings fans should be worried about if we want to keep both Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. Because here is how it typically works. In the NFL, a wide receiver of your caliber signs a deal. You are looking to go above that deal. If you are of that same caliber, signing a deal later. We've seen that countless time and time again. It is a deal that will set the market for a type of receiver that Zay Flowers is. And I think Jordan Addison is better than Zay Flowers, even though Zay Flowers had a really good year last year. But I think Jordan Addison is more versatile and can do just a lot more than Zay Flowers does altogether. Even if the stats haven't been there for him, because Addison's been a number two guy with a quarterback that hasn't been as great and has to also share snaps with Justin Jefferson or share targets with Justin Jefferson. And Zay Flowers doesn't. Zay Flowers has one of the best quarterbacks in the league, is the number one option in that offense. And so he's going to put up the better numbers. I still think Jordan Addison is a better player, but I think it's fair to say they're at the same sort of caliber as one another. So Jordan Addison, at the very least, is going to want 4 years, $140 million. He's going to want the $35 million average annual value. He's probably going to want more than that. You're probably going to have to pay him more than that, whether it's 36, 37. It's not going to be a ton more, but it's going to be marginally more. But then that means you're paying Jordan Addison more than Justin Jefferson. And you can't do that because Justin Jefferson is a tier above Jordan Addison. So then if you're going to want to sign both of these guys, first you're going to have to sign Justin Jefferson to a much bigger contract. That's going to have to be up towards the JSN range, or what Puka Nacua signs whenever it is he signs with the Los Angeles Rams, because that is the caliber of wide receiver that Justin Jefferson is. He has to be paid at the very top of the market. And so that's whatever extension he is due for next, that is what he will get. And if that extension has to come a little bit earlier because you really can't in good faith pay Jordan Addison more than Justin Jefferson even for a season, then you're going to be paying one receiver current Justin Jefferson money and one receiver current Jackson Smith and Jigba sort of money, and that is going to take up a serious amount of your cap space. So what is the answer there? well, you do not extend Jordan Addison, unfortunately. You want to keep Justin Jefferson around for as long as you can, both not only for his otherworldly generational skill, but also because of the PR disaster that would come from a trade or release or failure to re-sign of a wide receiver of Justin Jefferson's caliber. He should be a player that the Vikings try to keep a Viking throughout the entirety of his NFL career. Unless, of course, he's just holding on for far too long at the end of his career. But you want to keep Justin Jefferson, so you give him the Jackson Smith-Njigba pay raise. And then you let Jordan Addison walk. One, you're hoping that Ty Felton, again, like we mentioned earlier, has taken those significant steps forward. Maybe that's the case. Two, you hope that a guy like Jawan Jennings, once again, can fall into your lap, and then he would just be your number 2 receiver, and then Ty Felton is your number 3 receiver. Or you can draft a guy in the first round in 2027 or 2028, both classes which are, as of right now, long way off for both of them, but look to have a lot of wide receiver talent in them. So if the Vikings, for whatever reason, like if the season goes haywire right away, have to go quarterback in 2027, they can go wide receiver in 2028. Or they could go wide receiver if Kyler Murray looks really good, if JJ McCarthy looks really good, and one of those is, in fact, the starting quarterback of the future, and you can put quarterback on the back burner of future needs, then you can pick one of the top wide receivers in the game in college football. And probably not going to be Jeremiah Smith unless it's a really bad season, and then you're going to be picking quarterback. But you can get a really good wide receiver in a deep wide receiver class in the first round in 2027. So Jordan Addison is a step below Justin Jefferson, obviously. You don't want to have to pay both of those guys, I think, at what they need to be paid in order to be on this team, because it's going to handicap you in a lot of other areas. And you don't have draft picks from the last 3 or 4 years to offset what you would be missing out then in free agency. And Addison also has some of the off-the-field issues anyway, with the drunk driving and the belligerent behavior at the casino in Florida, and the speeding and all of that. So maybe it is just, you cut ties after the 5 years. You still pick up the rookie option, the 5th-year option that you get for the first rounders, and have them play out the 2027 season. But if the cap does not go up significantly more than we think it's going to go up, then I don't think you can afford to have both Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison on this roster, and it would be time to say sayonara to the former USC and Pittsburgh wide receiver Jordan Addison, which is tough to say, but that is a part of the football business. Now, finally, I would like to point out one final thing that is making my job as a Vikings content creator trying to adequately evaluate the roster going into 2026 a lot more difficult, and that is a much stricter enforcement of the no filming policy that the Vikings have at training camp. Now, Minnesota has had this sign up for years at TCO, probably since the first year that the teams were playing at TCO, and probably even since they were at Mankato. They have had signs posted about, and they've had a policy, do not film during practice, and specifically during the team sessions where they're installing a lot of their plays. But it's not something that has ever really been enforced. You'd see a lot of videos make their way onto Twitter or Facebook or TikTok or wherever. And one of the best providers of these videos for folks that can't go to training camp and see what's going on is Dustin Baker. And I don't know Dustin Baker at all, or Dust Baker. He just goes by Dust, I think is his, I don't know if that's his Twitter handle. But I have appreciated the film that he provides from Vikings training camp. And Dustin Baker was, the other day, reached by Vikings security, who trespassed him from the facility. He cannot go back there for 1 year because he was filming. It seems like there's going to be some stricter filming enforcement, because before Monday and Tuesday's practice, security used an air horn, per some of the reports from folks at training camp, and before practice made an announcement that they were going to be strict at stopping people from filming practice. And because of that, not a lot of clips have come out of Minnesota Vikings training camp since both Dustin Baker was banned from Vikings training camp and since the air horn announcement that was made yesterday. And the only thing I have to say is stop being soft, Vikings. Stop being soft, Kevin O'Connell. If somebody really wanted to steal your plays, they could just send someone there under the guise like a corporate spy sort of situation. They don't even need to film. They could just watch and mark down what formations are being run. There is no reason to do this cloak and dagger thing in 2026 because Spygate, if it were to happen again, could happen without a camera. If you have a football savant that you employ, and I'm sure every team does, where they just need to look at the field, see, oh, look, they're running a lot more wide zone out of this package and 13 personnel. There is no reason to prevent footage from reaching social media. Let us have this. Let us that can't get to Vikings training camp, which you are now charging for, by the way, to enter, which by itself is bullshit. The Arizona Cardinals, it's all free. You can go and see, and they have plenty of people there, and nobody is making sure that you are not filming their practice when you go to State Farm Stadium to keep an eye on Cardinals training camp. So you're already charging people to have to come in to watch practice. So now you have a fewer selection of people that can go, and you have a fewer selection of people that can now actually see what's going on and enjoy the fun parts about Minnesota Vikings training camp, and that is the roster speculation. So my advice to whoever is in charge, and my message to them, whether it's Kevin O'Connell, Nolan Teasley, the Wilf family, grow up and let folks video. It's not that big of a deal. It's not state secrets that are being, we're not sharing the plans to bomb a country in a Signal app right here. We are sharing plays from training camp that are not even at an all-22 angle where teams or where scouts from other teams would be able to get a good gauge on it anyway. And by the time your first game is on film, teams know what your plan is anyway. So the only one you're really preventing from getting a head start in their game planning is the Green Bay Packers in week 1. Because once you put everything onto game film, then other teams start to build their notebook anyway, and none of them at that point are going to be looking at, oh, this is play that they ran in training camp. It's going to be, what are they doing during games, in regular season games? There is no reason to be so fascist with your film policy, Ziggy Wilf, Mark Wilf, Kevin O'Connell, Viking security on a power play, or Nolan Teasley. Let the people film. Let the people post, selfishly for me, so that I can see what is going on at training camp, who looks good, who doesn't, and get an idea of what this team looks like going into the 2026 season. Stop being ridiculous, grow up, and let people film. That is going to be it for this week's show. We're going to be back next Wednesday with more updates from the quarterback battle and also a preview of the first preseason game, which gets underway on August 15th. That is next Saturday or next Sunday. But again, that will be our next show, which is a week from today. And that's the vibe for this afternoon. Thanks for tuning in and riding with me on the vibe of the Vikings. We hope that you enjoyed this one just as much as we did. Keep spreading that purple energy. We'll be back next week to check the vibe again. Until then, stay loud, stay loyal, Skol.